All right, so I guess 12:03, so we can dive in and get started. So again, welcome everyone to the Live Peer Community Call. We do these about once every 2 weeks. They're open to all who want to participate. They can kind of join the call from the calendar invite that gets sent around and mention in the chat room they'd like to participate, but we're also streaming live to crypto.livepeer.tv for those who want to just passively watch along, and we record these and upload them later. And each week we typically try to share an agenda in advance with a couple topics that we hope will be of interest to the Live Peer community, whether that be on the kind of video side and technology side or more on the crypto and protocol side. I think 2 weeks ago we had a great call about GPU transcoding and video and node operations and performance. And I think this week we're talking more about protocol, both a retrospective of the bug that occurred this week that we got fixed, and also looking a little bit at some of the proposals people have made about increasing the number of nodes on the network and talking about the trade-offs of doing that or not doing that before streamflow. So I think that, and then of course plenty of time for Q&A and anything else that anyone wants to share, and we try and keep it well under an hour. So I think we can dive in and getting started. Is Nelson here on the call?
Yeah, I am, Doug.
Hey, Nelson. Welcome. Would you like to kind of kick it off and guide some of the discussion topics that you had in mind?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so yeah, so the first topic we're going to talk through was doing a brief sort of retrospective on the protocol bug fix. So I guess to like kick it off, some of you may have seen that there was a post that Doug made on the forum, sort of explaining what happened and the changes that were made. But I thought to go sort of run back through the basics of it, Doug. So the first question I had was, what was the issue, and how was it identified?
Great. So yeah, I think this occurred on Monday morning. We got an email to security@livepeer.org, which is kind of our responsible disclosure security team email address, from a security researcher named Sam CZ Sun, who had been looking at the protocol code and thought that he might have seen a potential issue. So he made us aware of it, kind of through the responsible disclosure policy. And from that point, we kind of kicked into our predefined incident response procedure. We could talk about that a little bit. But so what was the issue? What Sam had reported was that he thought that transcoders could be slashed inappropriately in scenarios where they should be slashed. And slashing is a term that we use to mean some of their deposit, some of their stake could be essentially burned, right? And the reason that we have slashing is to prevent malicious behavior. So there's a few scenarios where transcoders would be slashed. One of which is if they misencode segments of video, if they do something like insert malicious content or output blank data. That's one scenario where you'd want to slash them and penalize them. But there's a couple others. And the one that he talked about that was subject to this bug was if transcoders tried to get paid twice for doing only one unit of work. And I prepared a couple of unstyled slides to maybe explain how Live Peer works in that regards. That might be helpful to people. Let me see if I can share that over. Okay, can you see this?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so this is real quick. The way that Live Peer works is that transcoders transcode segments of video. So if you're streaming video for 30 seconds, that may be broken down into 15 different 2-second segments of video. And each of those segments has kind of a number that identifies it. So you have segment 1, segment 2, segment 3, segment 4, segment 5, right? And this unit of work, each segment is what the transcoder gets paid for, and kind of claims and represents that they do. So as they're transcoding, they kind of keep track of the work that they've done, and then they can submit claims. They can submit claims to the Live Peer smart contract to claim the work that they've done. So in this example, the transcoder is saying, for job number 1, I'm claiming segments 1 through segment segments 3, right? And then after some time passes, if no one kind of challenges this, then the transcoder can come back and say, okay, now I'd like to be paid for segments 1 through segments 3. That's kind of how they represent the work they've done and how they get paid. And ideally, you'd want to claim hundreds or thousands of segments at one time, in one transaction. But if you don't, if there's kind of a gap in the segments, or you're kind of claiming as you go, the transcoder can make more claims for more segment ranges. So they can submit a second claim for, say, segments 4 through segment 5 to kind of claim all the work for all 5 segments that they've done. But what happens is, if they claim the same segments twice, then they can be slashed or penalized. So for example, in the previous slide, they already claimed segments 4 through 5. And here, if they make another claim transactions again through segments 4 through 5, then observers have the ability to kind of watch for that and to submit a slashing transaction that will provide proof that it'll tell the protocol to look up and see if they claim the same segments twice, and then it will slash or penalize them. And I'm actually going to put some code on the screen, not to go through line by line, but just to demonstrate. Here is the simple double claim segment slash code that does this check. And basically, real quickly, it just it looks at the 2 claims that are passed in. It looks at the segment ranges of those claims. It makes sure that they haven't already been slashed. And if the segment ranges overlap, so for example, if the same segment is contained within both segments, then it will slash some of the transcoder's stake and refund the broadcaster. And the weakness here was that this code, although it kind of gets the complex logic of doing the segment range checks correctly, there was a glaring kind of long-standing weakness here, in that it never actually checked that the 2 claims that were passed in were distinct. And so if someone said, claim number 1 and claim number 1 claim the same segments, well, of course they do, because they're the same exact claim. And this function actually would have slashed the transcoder if people had invoked that. And so the fix was actually pretty simple. It was a 1-line require statement that just checked that the 2 claims IDs were not the same. And that alone was sufficient to prevent this from this bug from existing. And so that's the overview of the bug. It's kind of important to note that this bug was not exploited and no transcoders were slashed or lost funds as a result. But it's also kind of important to recognize, this is not a super complex bug. This was not steeped in the deep, intricate logic of how Ethereum works, or super intimate knowledge of the LivePeer protocol. It's kind of has been hiding in plain sight, and it's been sitting out there for the 1.5 years that the protocol has been running. And it's a total surprise. This is why we kind of have these bug fix mechanisms, these security response procedures in place, the ability to upgrade during the alpha. And we're glad that it was kind of identified by a security researcher and reported to the team, and we were able to kind of quickly make the necessary fix. So I think that kind of concludes the overview. Yeah. Any questions about the bug itself?
Do I see it right that basically a transcoder would have to form that malicious request and then would be slashed itself? So it wouldn't be possible for an attacker to slash a random transcoder like this, but more like the transcoder itself?
No, that's incorrect. Basically, so the design is that the transcoder would actually have to be malicious in order to ever claim the same segments twice, because the software won't do that if it doesn't have bug. And there's no way those transactions would get crafted where they'd claim the same segments twice, so therefore they could never be slashed. But to the bug that didn't check this, it would have enabled any random attacker to slash any transcoder who had made claims of work on the network.
Ah, okay. So even so they did a correct claim, they would be able to be slashed.
Correct. That was the bug.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Hey, Doug, I just had a quick question on sort of the mechanics of fixing bugs. So when you say that you fix the bug, does that mean you kind of upgraded the contract and use your proxy mechanism to point it to the new upgraded contract?
Yep, that's right. Just getting into the procedure for actually mechanically doing these upgrades. First the security team made the decision to pause the protocol because we identified that user funds would be at risk if this was exploited, and similarly knew that it was not at risk for a long downtime because the fix was pretty straightforward. And then we used the proxy upgrade mechanism to deploy a new version of the jobs manager contract and to register that as the kind of active version on the protocol, and then unpause the protocol to resume the protocol operation.
Thank you. And just to be clear, the ability to repoint proxies is today kind of centralized in the team, but like long term will be decentralized?
Correct. Yep. That gets into the kind of governance and decentralization roadmap, which is definitely an upcoming important topic for us as we deliver streamflow. And the intention is, yes, of course, like protocol upgrades, parameter updates should be not necessarily centrally controlled, but invoked via decentralized governance mechanisms. And of course, the challenge becomes getting that right with urgent bug fix situations like this. And there's some proposed mechanisms that other projects made how you can kind of satisfy both cases going forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Doug, for the color. Appreciate it.
Yep.
And Doug, I just had one other question. So in regards to the protocol pause, obviously in this early stage, that's possible, but my understanding is when we get to mainnet, that won't be an option. So what would be the process then?
When you say mainnet, you mean, because this is obviously already running on mainnet, but it's very much the alpha, it's pre-stream flow. Are you suggesting once we get to full production and fully decentralized kind of governance of the protocol, how would something like this work?
Yeah.
That's a great like governance and security design trade-off topic with a lot of possibilities. One mechanism that's been used by other projects and proposed that I think is interesting is that through decentralized governance, stakeholders could essentially elect a security team that has the ability to pause, and through kind of many stakeholder multi-sig mechanism, for example. But it would be that smaller set that has the ability to do it in the best interest of the protocol, and their power to be a member of that set would be granted by the decentralized governance of the project itself. So all stakeholders would have a say in who's participating in this and have the right checks and balances to make sure that they have no abuse of power there. So that's one mechanism that's been used by other protocols as well. I think it's interesting, and I think it deserves kind of a study and design session in and of itself. In the current phase that we're in, kind of the alpha, as it's always been communicated, like this is a large complex protocol. It's expected that in the early days, there'll be these types of bugs discovered. There needs to be iteration to make this network really usable and scalable and cost effective. That's what we're running at in streamflow. And so kind of during this early phase, by design and explicitly, it's kind of a limited set that can kind of take these measures and move quickly and fix bugs and protect user funds. And that's kind of, the two top priorities in the evaluation security response procedure are, maintaining confidence in the protocol and protecting user funds, essentially. And so if either of those are, at risk, that makes it a much easier call to decide to kind of use these mechanisms like the pause and bug fix upgrade, where it clearly would benefit the community to do so.
Okay, great. Before we move on, did anyone have any other questions related to the protocol bug?
I'm curious to just hear kind of from the community, any reflection around, like, do you think, after hearing how this contract was upgraded and how this bug was discovered and treated, is there any areas of improvement that we can make around this, so that we can constantly improve our security practices going forward? And it's fine if there's no suggestions. I was just wondering if there were. I would want to hear that.
Yeah, one thing we included in the retrospective that we didn't talk on the call yet was that we're very appreciative of the security community that spends their time like looking through contracts, looking for bugs, reporting bugs. We encourage that. We have a bounty program, and the researcher was paid is to be paid a $5,000 equivalent bounty in order for going through this responsible security disclosure process, and not kind of using the bug for their own personal gain or selling the exploit to someone who's going to take advantage of it. And hopefully that encourages others to participate in the same or similar process as they find bugs going forward as well. But we also welcome input on that process and what's interesting there as well.
Okay, brilliant. All right, and then so moving on, so the next topic we're going to talk through is having an open discussion on the transcoder limit increase proposals. So as some of you may have seen on the forum, so Chris actually posted a change proposal form, which allows people to fill out the form and make certain parameter change proposals to the community. And one of the commonly sort of proposed changes was to increase the current 25 max active transcoders. And there was some discussion in the forum talking about the limitations of making these changes due to essentially the gas costs and like the size of filling up Ethereum blocks. So I wanted to sort of have a bit of a discussion around the possibilities. So I know, for example, Block Damon was talking about perhaps it could be increased to 33, but then obviously there's a trade-off there, spending time to make such a sort of marginal change. So it'd be great to hear your thoughts, Doug, but also from the wider community of what people think of these changes, and if they think they're feasible or worth the time at this stage.
Sure. Not to put anyone on the spot, but I know some of our team members kind of weighed in with thoughts around various angles of these proposals. So maybe before I share my thoughts or opinions, Yandin, I don't know if you are in a position or want to kind of weigh in with a response here. Nico, I know you shared some thoughts as well.
Sure. So I left a comment on that thread. Well, first of all, I thought that the discussion thread that happened previous to my comment was great. And I think this type of discussion is super healthy, even if there's disagreement on what path to take with regards to this particular parameter change. My own personal opinion on the matter was that just based upon some like quick local benchmarking I did on the gas cost implications for various active set sizes, you can refer to the comment thread for the actual numbers, but it's something like for a size of 30, for bumping it up from 25 to 30, it's something like 5.3 million gas for the initialized round transaction, and that's like 67% of the block gas limit. And then if you push it up to 50, then you've exceeded the block gas limit if you assume a block gas limit on average of 8 million. And if you do something like 40 in the middle, there's like a middle ground there where it's probably going to be ballpark 6.5 million gas, but it is going to consume the vast majority of that block that the round initialization transactions mined in. So I think round initialization is the main gas bottleneck here, although it's not the only transaction that there are gas cost implications for. And the other transactions that there are gas cost implications for are the bond, unbond, rebond, and reward transactions, although the impact on those transactions is substantially less than the impact on the round initialization transaction. So I thought it would just be helpful to mention these data points for other people's consideration. But I ultimately think that it feels to me that there's a marginal benefit in increasing the active set size right now, and considering the operational overhead that's always required when trying to securely update anything that's managed by the smart contract. It feels like time and effort might be better spent focusing on the re-architecture that we have planned for the contract, such that there's substantially less gas cost implications whenever we need to change the cap on the number of transcoders that are operating on the network. And it seems like from a time and effort standpoint, that might be a better use of it, because then that will unlock much greater possibilities, and we won't be talking about small, minute increases in the active set size, but much larger increases. So that's my own personal point of view, but I'm definitely open to hearing arguments and opinions from other people as well.
Yeah, I'll just add to what Yannen said. Like, I agree with most things Yannen said. I think the concerns voiced are mostly out of a long-term view on decentralization of the protocol, but we've already established that we would upgrade the amount of transcoders by several magnitudes when streamflow releases. So I think we can make improvements in other areas, though, than simply increasing the protocol parameter. I think on one hand, we can do a better job of explaining to users that the top transcoder in the Explorer is not necessarily the best transcoder to delegate to. I think that would greatly help with decentralization, as in getting more stake divided between all of the transcoders rather. And another thing we could possibly do better is do better communication on what the intentional goals are for the different development phases that we have for the project. For example, the goal of the current phase pre-streamflow is sort of to test the crypto economic assumptions of the staking protocol, and then streamflow itself is more of a scaling upgrade. And I think we could potentially do a better job of just conveying those messages to the community.
Might it be an option to get around the gas limitations to use another network like Ethereum Classic or Pearl?
Sure, that like there's lots of huge re-architecture, community moving protocol deploying options that be available that are more operationally intensive than just kind of changing a parameter in the protocol.
That's not what I meant at all. I just meant, my question was, is it possible to deploy on another network instead of Ethereum that's 100% compatible with Ethereum, such as Ethereum Classic or Pearl?
Okay.
Is it an option?
I think it is an option,
sure.
but we also have to weigh whether those networks themselves are not way less decentralized than the Ethereum mainnet, for example, because that's also a way of decentralizing. But
yeah,
it's a different way, question. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Just talking about the gas limit is all. That's the reason why I asked.
Yep.
I see Philip's message about Ethereum Classic. I'm not talking about different blockchains versus different blockchains. I'm just talking about, I know Ethereum is saturated in gas, and that's what we're currently talking about. My question is there anything to gain by looking at other networks? Are we stuck on one? Is it about the technology, or, you know, can the technology run elsewhere? I think it can, right?
Yep. Yeah, it definitely can. Yep.
That's all.
And then long discussion about implications of doing so.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. Cool. So one thing, one question I have for the community is, clearly there's some there's some trade-offs here, right? Like right now, the barrier to entry is very high to run infrastructure on the network. Someone might have a bunch of GPUs and say, this is great, I'm excited about streamflow, I want to come and join this network and learn how to participate and get ready to run when streamflow comes. But they come and they see, well, I need to attract 85,000 LPT and stake to break into the active set. Feels impossible, I'm going to give up. And we've heard this happen over and over again. It's frustrating to people, and it's kind of turning away someone who might otherwise be a great participant in the network. So one question is, well, would going through a little bit of the operational overhead and risk associated with upgrading to say 33 or 35 orchestrators, creating more slots, would that actually solve that problem in any way? Would it dramatically lower the barrier to entry? Like, what do people observe? Do they think that all of a sudden there would be way less stake required to break into the active set? Or do we think that now that there's all these kind of professional-ish node as a service operators who make it easy to just put your stake down and spin up a node, that the spots would kind of quickly be taken and redelegated towards, and the barrier would still remain at something that feels pretty high and hard to achieve for a newcomer?
My quick opinion on that, if you want it, Doug, is that I think nominally in the Explorer, the stakes drop off pretty significantly after the last kind of active transcoder. So potentially there could be an easy, those folks could get on the network with like a much lower stake. But I suspect that that if you do open up the slots, probably a lot more people would begin to delegate to those folks, and you would have, you would still have a fairly substantial kind of barrier to get in at the bottom, probably like tens of thousands of dollars at least. So that's the impression. But what's the goal of kind of opening up the slots? Is it more around kind of giving an opportunity and educating more supply side folks, or?
Right, that's a great question, because I think so. Educating more supply side folks, enabling some more infrastructure operators to begin to participate and learn and become kind of active members of the network would be a positive. But if you zoom out and look at, well, when is it actually worth it for them to dedicate significant hardware and infrastructure to this network? It's not actually today. Today you're kind of learning and participating and helping and testing, but it's at streamflow, right? Like when streamflow comes out, that's when, with your DevOps experience and your hardware and the bandwidth you have access to and the cheap electricity cost you have access to, that's when you'll be able to compete and perform work at scale and help the network a lot with video encoding. And so there is an argument here where, well, in the meantime, you're better off maybe just delegating and running the test builds and participating in the streamflow test nets, and not, because you're not really helping the network that much by being an additional orchestrator or additional transcoder in the pre-streamflow days right now.
Right. Yep. That makes sense to me. And of course, being a transcoder, like my incentive is to keep the delegator set, the transcoder set, like fairly limited, at least in the early stages. So keep in mind that would be my bias, to be fair. But it does feel like there still would be probably pretty significant monetary barriers to loading up a new transcoder, even if you open it up a bit.
Is there anyone on the call who maybe is in the position of, I really want to run a transcoder and I'm blocked out right now? And if so, maybe you just share some feelings about, why you think, like, what's the motivation for wanting to run a transcoder today pre-streamflow?
I'd love to run a transcoder. I just don't have the money to invest to do it. Why would I want to run the transcoder? For the tech to play with it, you know, to be able to be a part of it. Right? Luckily, I'm a part of it. But still, like I'd love to run one myself, but I just can't afford it.
Yep, I think that probably captures the sentiment of many people. They want to be a part of it, and they want to prepare for, you know, running in streamflow when it's far more open and competitive. And the way you do that is by actually participating and actually dealing with the challenges and figuring it out and reporting the bugs and engaging with the others who are doing it. And so that's what people are blocked from right now. And it's also worth asking, are there other solutions that we could focus on that would enable that to be fulfilled without necessarily making mainnet super expensive for initializing rounds, bonding, unbonding, reward calls, etc. And some ideas that come to mind there are like public streamflow testnet, and even thinking about large scale tests or simulations with kind of to-dos when people are expected to be active and help capture metrics or help develop this or test the software. So any sort of actions that people can take in preparing for streamflow may kind of satisfy that itch to participate, be part of it, and be prepared.
Doug, just to add to that, I think like to talk about the sort of sentiment. So it does seem like with some of the 25, the longer that it's just 25, I guess they further sort of entrench and like build their kind of moat. And I think like one of the fears would be that what we've kind of observed is that a lot of people aren't being super active, sort of reacting to fees. So like, for example, some people that like were near the bottom 25, they're dropping their fee to like 0 or near 0 and gaining market share that way. But like, I think the fear would be, is there an incentive once the transcoder set opens up for people to delegate to these newer unproven transcoders relative to the top 5 that have been reliable over time? So like maybe that would be a better way to approach it. Of like, technically we probably can't make changes now, but is there ways to add incentives to give sort of newer transcoders a way to actually get started? Because I think that could be the problem, is that a lot of these, if we open up to 100 or 1,000, that outside of the 25, it's like a very tiny portion of the network.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Hopefully, as work starts flowing through and fees start flowing through, people are actually competing and earning them based on their operational setup, their response times, their performance of continuing to do the work well. It'll make clear, which nodes are worth your delegation in exchange for the fee share, and it should shift things. But yeah, absolutely. If it's really hard to get any work routed to you because you have no stake built up because you were outside of the set for the few months leading up to streamflow, it may just take longer, or it might be a higher barrier entry to kind of build that history.
Yeah, okay. I guess those transcoders could also add value in other ways, like building, tools for the community and applications. And they'll also have 2 different sort of fee parameters that they can work with to stay competitive.
Yep, that also does bring up another kind of argument for increasing the set, which is there's been a number of project proposals that people are looking for like inflation funding for, essentially. Like they're campaigning that they want to develop something for the ecosystem. But because the barrier to entry to get in the active set is so high, it's been hard to kind of organically build up stake and generate some tokens via a reward cut in order to fund development of the project. And so, if there's X more slots, it potentially means X more experiments or opportunities for people to attract inflation funding for their project as well.
Okay,
Great.
so
Any other thoughts or any suggestions on this particular type of proposal, where to go from here? It sounds like there's been a bunch of open debate, and clearly there's trade-offs in either direction. The next step might be someone kind of championing or consolidating a lot of these arguments to make a cogent proposal rather than just kind of a one-liner with one trade-off.
Well, I have a question. This is Rafi. When we move to streamflow, how many transcoders and orchestrators will there be, and what will the minimum be, or how are you calculating that?
Yep, the first plan is to bump up the number of orchestrators to on the order of 100 orchestrators. And then there can be infinite transcode pieces of hardware behind those orchestrators. Someone just has a GPU and they just want to play the role of transcoder, they may still need a relationship with an orchestrator, but theoretically there's no limit. So if the network bumps up to 100 orchestrators, what will the barrier entry to be to attain one of those 100 slots? I think it'd be very, very low initially. It's hard to make an exact prediction, but yeah.
Well, we've been talking about all these different ways of doing it. Is it, for a while it was the amount of token in the circulating divided by n, and that was the number of orchestrators, and everyone would have the same amount of token. So it sounds like that's not the case anymore, but there's a balance between it being very low and that being a really easy way for someone to do a shitty job, and then the company who's paying for transcoding has a bad experience. So like, what's the evolved thinking of the balance there?
Right, great question. So it's kind of a two-part question. So one is, what's the mechanic by which someone would get in the active set, and at least in the first iteration, very little change off of where we are today, where it's just the top 100 most staked nodes would be in the active set, and you could do the calculation of, well, what's the total stake divided by 100, and then that if you have at least that minimum amount, you would be in the set, but in reality it'll be much lower because not everything is staked and there's more concentration towards the top. So that's kind of the mechanic for getting into the set. But to address the second question of, how do you make sure there's enough security such that this node won't do a poor job and won't maliciously attack someone's stream because they don't have a lot at stake. And that is actually addressed by the client, or like broadcaster preferences. Essentially, like the client code can still enforce, I'm not willing to work with any node that has less than X dollars of stake at risk, because I want $50,000 of security, or I want $100,000 of security for this high value stream, or I want $1 million of security for this high value stream. And there can be a default implementation in the client that uses something sane that ensures you by default need some minimum amount of security provided in order to do the work. But it can also be configurable for anyone who cares to change it and work with a node with more or less stake.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, and so unless anyone had any other questions, the final point we're going to run through was really just observing that it looks like we're approaching the 50% target participation rate. So I think last I checked, we were at 48.5%, maybe at 49% today. So yeah, I thought we could just have a brief discussion on, so what happens when the target gets hit? I think a lot of us are probably familiar with that at this point. And then sort of also just a wider question on how will those participation rate changes be made in the future? So kind of related, I guess, to the transcoder question.
Sure. Just a quick reminder, when the participation rate hits 50%, the only thing that changes is that there's an inflation rate of how many new tokens are generated each round. Just take the inflation rate and multiply it by the total number of tokens, and that's how many new tokens will be printed in the next round. And when the 50% target gets hit, that inflation rate will begin dropping a little bit each day. And that's essentially it. The result of that is fewer tokens will be printed each day as opposed to more tokens being printed each day. And if you look out over the long term, over the next 16 months or so, then you'll see the inflation rate potentially approaching a much lower rate or even zero. And that, of course, depends on many things. It depends on the people on bond. It depends on it basically depends on the participation rate, but that'll be determined by fees and usage in the network, if people on bond, what alternative uses for the token there are, what kind of alternative returns people are getting in the DeFi ecosystem, will all kind of be inputs into what people do as the inflation rate begins to drop. So that's kind of the quick summary of what happens.
Okay, great. And so with the participation rate, let's say that as that inflation rate starts to come down and reach zero, I guess so why the 50% number? Why not 66% or 75%?
So that actually an arbitrary number. Right? It's rooted in logic a little bit and critical thinking a little bit, but the idea here was for the community, and especially as decentralized governance becomes involved, it becomes kind of human rational to reason about what percentage of the token do we think it's important to have locked up and participating in the network versus what percent maybe should be available for people to enter and exit the system, liquidity, and even creative alternative uses that may emerge around the video and live peer ecosystem. And so 50% was kind of the target starting point, but this is certainly a value that I'm sure the community will debate about and potentially want to govern in the future to ensure that there's enough participation and security in order to provide a high quality video streaming network. And we mentioned decentralized governance. We mentioned, should this number change? Do we want this number to change? I'll give kind of my own opinion here, which is this number, I think, certainly can and should be changed if it's important for the kind of economics and the security of the network, but I don't think that it would be prudent for this to be changed in any sort of centralized way whatsoever, because it affects kind of the inflation and the economics directly, and people's kind of thoughts about participating in the network directly. And so I certainly think on the decentralization roadmap, which is a whole nother bigger topic for the future, the ability for kind of parameter updates to be enacted via the community's will. This is one that I would definitely fall into that bucket.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks. All right, and did anyone have any other questions they wanted to run through or updates?
Well, I think one thing that's interesting to point out is that if the participation rate hits 50% and the inflation starts to drop, it will take a period of time for it to decrease to a low level, because right now the inflation in the network is quite high. So I think it's good to know that, and just know that when it's not when it hits 50% and all of a sudden inflation drops to zero, something like that.
Great. Any other topics or questions people had about anything related to live here? All right, so I guess we can wrap up.
Sorry,
Go ahead, Rafi.
Rafi here. Are there any, well, I can do it two ways. I would love feedback on the new website that will be for the crypto community. And I could either quickly show you guys here, or I could, for people in the community, we could just reach out if anyone's willing to give feedback on that. It's mostly the team here, so do y'all want me to show you just kind of the high level output of it? If we have
Sure,
10 minutes?
we got a few minutes.
Okay. Okay. We made a lot of progress last week, so I wasn't planning on doing this. We have something. Can y'all see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. I'm just finding the right one. Okay, so these are a work in progress, but I'd rather, because we're on a pretty tight development deadline, I'd rather get people's feedback. And we can do, like, just reach out if you want, if you have feedback. But basically, the token holder page will be a subdomain of livepeer.org, and is kind of like the home for token holders, transcoders and orchestrators, and open source contributors, as well as just general community members. So when you come to the site, it's going to be first, like the first resource is going to be a LivePeer 101. It's going to be this awesome primer that we're going to share out next week that Adam's built. And then the other call to action is joining Discord. The second piece is not finalized, but basically the point of it is to explain why people should care about what LivePeer is doing. It doesn't do that right now, but basically it's going to be like, number one, transcoding is really expensive. Here's how it works. And number two, we're reducing the cost by 10x. And then the next part is you can either participate as a transcoder or orchestrator, or you can stake towards someone who will do the work on your behalf. And so this is kind of the piece around like the crypto economy and how as a participant you are incentivized. And then there's some stats that that will be around kind of the ecosystem. And then there's kind of this wheel where you can toggle between being a token holder, an infrastructure provider, or a developer. And so this is not correct, but basically it's like, number one, get token. Number two, learn how to stake your token. Number three, stake your token. And number four, sign up to keep up to date so that we can make sure that token holders are getting alerted if their transcoder changes their reward call. And that will be linked to Adam's LivePeer studio. The infrastructure part is over here. And basically, this is a work in progress. I'm going to reach out to some people on the team for this, but it's like kind of like a link to the documentation for transcoders and orchestrators, a link for them to post their campaign, and then a place where they can communicate with token holders on Discord. And then the delegator or developers is kind of around the documentation, looking at research, like the type of research we're doing, and a link for the grants. And then some of the videos will be here as well. And then there's two other pages. One is a resources tab, which will kind of highlight the white paper. And then there will be other resources that will be like a staking guide, and then a link to the app again. Open source will be a link to like the documentation and GitHub and like kind of being able to see our releases. And there will be a blockchain 101 video that Angie has already done a few times, and we'll make it look pretty for this, and it'll be embedded here, right here. And then there will be a separate section under resources, which will be embedded tutorials on how to use the new staking app. And then there's a page on the just community. And the goal of this is to really highlight how involved the community is and how people can get involved, whether they want to be, you know, like admins, like Nelson and Alvin and others are, or they want to build a tool. And we want to also highlight a lot of the amazing things other people have built. And so, yeah, that's and then also they can join the next community call. And then there will be an FAQ. But that's the kind of high level, pretty simple outline for the site as it stands. We have 5 minutes, so if there's any like initial questions or feedback, I'm happy to take notes on that.
So
I'm super excited about the community showcase.
Me too.
I think that'll be great. We've never had a place to like show off all the great projects people have built. So that's a great destination.
Awesome.
Yeah, likewise. I just want to understand, like what you just showed is gonna completely replace our current website,
No,
or is it like a
it's a
section? Oh, it's a
subdomain.
section. I see.
So it'll be livepeer.org/crypto, or
Got it.
I'm not sure what it will be, but crypto or token. And then the token button will go to that site.
I see. Cool.
Anything anyone feels like is missing, or like they didn't see that they would think is important for people?
I remember seeing a section of like, these are the tools that you can use as a token holder. Is that right?
Yeah.
Right. Cool. Like, it might be good to think about like, what's the, like, are we assuming that token holders that come here don't have any crypto experience? Meaning like should Etherscan be a tool for people, right? And things like that, like, because that's,
yeah,
you know, like.
So we're designing for the persona that Shuan and Mincy presented last time, which was like the crypto investor. So we feel like that's the most likely candidate who's going to participate in stake-based protocols. So it's not like, we could definitely include Etherscan. I think that's a really good idea. But I don't think it's kind of a continuation based on that research that they did around who this is.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, so in that sense, like my hope would be that the token holder staking app would just kind of replace Etherscan for most of the workflows that, you know, these types of users go through, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Was there a section for rewards withdrawal?
That is on the staking app. This is just the website. But are you asking, was there a section on like how to unbond?
Yeah, because there were all the steps that lead.
Good point. Okay, I will add that. I will add that.
Yeah, also, at least on my screen now, it looked great during the run through, but it was, it was really small and hard to like capture any details. So maybe like I know there's probably like hundreds of screenshots in the whole workflow, but maybe just sharing, some of the important screens to give people a sense of like the architecture and content would be a way that people could just like take a look and share feedback about what's missing or what they like.
Yeah, sure. It's not ready for like a close look through, but probably at the end of next week I can do that.
Excellent. Well, thanks for running through that, Rafi. Sure. Thanks everyone for joining the call. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and in the meantime, we're working on kind of some advanced planning and preparation, inviting the right guests to participate around certain topics. So if there's any topics that people would be excited to discuss in a community call, definitely let Nelson know, and we'll get on planning a good one for the future on that topic. So thanks everyone. See you soon.
Thanks everybody.
Awesome, everyone. Thanks for joining.